What do analysts say about the efficiency of the Fed Senate hearings and what the Fed is doing for Americans in the immediate and distant future? Well, let's bring in Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. Thanks for joining me on this. Listen, you say Yellen said nothing of real value to the American people. You're not impressed. She's missing the point of what Americans really want to hear. And what is that, in your opinion?
Well, Americans aren't really even paying attention to what she's saying. It's more the financial markets that are sitting on pins and needles, parsing over every word that she says. But, she talked about the fact that it would be a problem if the Fed waited too long to raise rates or remove the accommodation. Well, duh. I mean, she's already waited too long. I mean, the time to nip that in the bud has long since passed. In fact, the minute the Fed lowered interest rates to zero, that was the mistake, right? The minute they checked us in to this monetary roach motel, there was no way to check us out. That is why the Fed has already acted so slowly in their increasing rates, because I think they know that another crisis is coming. They're just hoping that they don't get blamed for it.
So do you think then that the Fed is essentially postponing the pain of its prior mistakes, even Congress for that matter? Well, that's going to hurt.
Well, that's all it does. I mean, it makes mistakes and then it takes action to try to mitigate the short-term pain, but only at the expense of making the mistakes even larger so that the future pain is even worse. I mean, that's what happened when the Fed slashed interest rates in 01, 02 to mitigate the mistakes that inflated the stock market bubble, the tech bubble, and then those larger mistakes inflated a bigger bubble in the housing market. And then when that bubble burst in 2008, they made even larger mistakes, and that bubble, which was inflated by Bernanke and Yellen, has yet to pop. But when it does, the fallout is going to be much bigger than the 2008 financial crisis. And so that is a reason that Yellen is dragging her feet on these rate hikes, because the higher rates go, the sooner that crisis is going to arrive.
Well, then at this rate, how long can we go without the economy heading straight back into a recession? I mean, what's your prescription for keeping us out of it? Or if it's, if we've hit terminal velocity, pulling us out of it. It sounds to me like you're saying it's going to feel like a big piece of duct tape ripped off your arm.
Well, I don't think we ever really came out of recession. I mean, everybody says that this is the weakest recovery in history. In fact, the recovery is so weak that for the average American, the recovery was actually worse than the recession that we supposedly recovered from. And I think the reason the recovery is so weak is because it isn't a recovery. It's actually a recession camouflaged as a recovery behind phony GDP numbers. Because the government is underestimating inflation, we have a deflator that is too low. And so we've been able to manufacture out of thin air economic growth when there is none. See, that's why Donald Trump is the president of the United States. If we had real economic growth, he wouldn't have even been the Republican nominee, let alone the president. But it's because the economy is so weak, he was able to exploit that weakness and the fact that the public realizes that they're being lied to. They're being lied to by the government. They're being lied to by the media, by Wall Street. They're all trying to shove this phony recovery down their throats, and they threw up all over it and elected Donald Trump.
Wow, that's a graphic way of putting it, but you know what? A lot of people probably totally agree with you. Let's talk about what we heard Janet Yellen say earlier about the labor markets. Labor market unemployment is down. Jobless rates for certain minorities, though, is very high in those areas. She seems to be parroting what a lot of pundits were talking about when they said, the job market growth, the recovery. People don't seem to be feeling that. Do you think that these remarks sort of lend itself to the argument that you're making there?
Well, they may be feeling it, but not where Janet Yellen and everybody likes to pretend. I mean, these are phony numbers. Again, yes, we have a low unemployment rate because millions and millions of people who are not working are not counted as being unemployed, and millions more who are underemployed, who are working part-time jobs but who can't find full-time jobs, they're not being counted. So this, again, is a government illusion created by the statisticians. And, one of the things that happened recently, we got the most recent jobs numbers, and we had, for a change, we had about 700,000 people who had left the labor force coming back in. again. Now, they didn't get hired. They're now unemployed, so the unemployment rate is starting to notch up. But if more and more people who have been on the sidelines when it comes to the job market, if they now try to get into the game because they need the money, maybe they can no longer afford the luxury of not working, we're going to start to see a big increase in the official unemployment rate. And then we'll see the Fed, Janet Yellen, change her tune pretty quickly.
Okay, so talking about changing it quickly right now, you'd say jack them up right now. It's going to be painful, but we got to do it right now. Because on top of this, there's a lot of political grandstanding going on at these hearings. That has nothing to do with fiscal policy. Everyone's sort of covering their political bases. So if you could go into that room and say, look, brass tacks here, fellas, this is what we need to do, what would that be?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're right. The whole thing is a circus. It's all kind of grandstanding. But meanwhile, Janet Yellen is the ringleader of this circus, and it's all show. You know, politicians are trying to score brownie points. They speak in sound bites for their constituents. You know, so none of this really means anything. But again, Wall Street looks at this as if, you know, Janet Yellen actually knows something about the economy. And, you know, gold, the price of gold was up $10 before her prepared testimony was out. And as soon as the words came out that, you know, it would be a mistake to wait too long to raise rates, gold sold off. It went negative. It managed to close up a few bucks, but they're reacting to this as if there's actually anything new to be gleaned out of these statements. But, you know, if I was there, if I was the Fed chairman, you know, I would basically want to admit to all the mistakes that have been done by chairmen that preceded me. And I said, look, we're no longer going to price fix interest rates. The Fed is not going to try to micromanage interest rates like the Politburo in the Soviet Union used to try to fix the price of bread. We're going to let the market set interest rates. We're not going to interfere. We're not going to be doing quantitative easing. And interest rates would go way up. I mean, they have to go up. America has lots of debt. We have no savings. Interest rates need to go up. In fact, one of these senators asked Janet Yellen why the economy is growing so slowly. It's this monetary policy that is one of the main reasons. We don't have real capital investment. We don't have increasing productivity because the Fed is diverting all those resources to propping up speculative bubbles in the stock market, in the real estate market, in the bond market, and to prevent the government from making necessary cuts to government spending that would actually unleash the free market growth that would produce a rising standard of living. So we need to let interest rates go up, but then we need to let the chips fall where they may. Because if we do that now, after rates having been so low for so long, we're going to have a financial crisis worse than 2008. And at this point, we just have to suck it up and bear it. And if it means a lot of people lose money, and if it means banks fail, and it means people lose their jobs, that's what has to happen. Because we have to clean house. We have to allow this economy to restructure so we can rebuild it the right way. And not rebuild it based on government central planning, but let the free market rebuild it based on millions of Americans pursuing their own self-interest. This is what made America great in the first place. It was limited government. It was freedom where people could save and invest and produce. That's what we need again. We need to go back to the American dream. But before we can get there, we have to get out of this Fed-induced American nightmare.
Thank you so much for your input on this. Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro Pacific Capital.